Welcome to Heresy, the Horus Heresy talk show. In this video, we're going to be talking about the new Legacies of the Age of Darkness PDF that was recently released by Games Workshop to expand the Horus Heresy Age of Darkness universe. But before we do that, if you enjoyed the show, please do like the channel and subscribe. And if there's anything in this video you'd like to discuss further, please do leave me a comment. And if you've got any feedback, please leave me that as well. I do try to respond to all comments on YouTube because I really enjoy chatting with you guys. Okay, so on with the show. Now, this PDF was released as a free PDF, as a supplement to the game because it's only come out recently. And the intention of this PDF seems to have been to bring back some of the characters and units that weren't included in the books. Now, it's not 100% clear at this point whether this is it for all of these data sheets, like this is the only update they're getting, or if this is like a stopgap method until, you know, some new books come out with these rules in. But what is quite clear is that this PDF is a little bit maybe rushed and being put together a little bit hastily, because it's sort of a little bit all over the place in terms of like the quality of the rules writing and in terms of just the way it's put together. So we're going to have a look through it, and we're going to look at not every unit, but we're going to look at, you know, a good cross section of the units just to get an idea of, you know, what this PDF is like. So first of all, we start with this core and expanded army list profiles explanation. Now this talks about the fact that all army lists in the Horus Heresy are either going to be core or expanded, and the idea for this seems to have been that they want players to agree whether they're going to play core rules or with the expanded rules, and this is an expanded rules PDF, so it's kind of like if you and your opponent want to agree that you're not going to use the rules in this PDF, then that's what they're giving you the option to do. Now this is a little bit unusual, I think, in that it wasn't included in the core version of the rules. They've obviously put this together because they've released this PDF and they've decided that they want to give people the option not to use it. And that to me actually says quite a lot to start with, that maybe they know that this PDF is very basic or has not been, you know, maybe put together with the same level of quality as the other rules. I don't know. But it does give you an out if you don't like the rules in this PDF, which is good. So Heresy in general and the rules for Heresy so far have got a pretty great balance, and, you know, the units that have been released with the game have also got a really good balance generally. And that's not to say that there aren't ways to find the best ones if you really want to and just use the units with better rules, but even the units that maybe aren't the best units are generally capable of performing on the tabletop. So you can feel like you can add variety to your force and have a fun army with lots of different stuff in it without being sad that some of the stuff you're putting on the table is just bad. And that's really good so far. And if you've watched, you know, more of my videos, you will know that I've got quite a high opinion of the balance for the game, particularly if you are at least trying to, you know, control yourself a little bit in what you're putting in your army, you know, to keep your army reasonable. This PDF, though, is sort of like not that at all. This PDF has got lots of units that are either really, really good or just so bad that you would never use them, and you would feel bad putting them on the tabletop. So let's go through and have a look at some of the units. So first of all, we've got the Knights Errant. So these guys have stats in the old Horus Heresy books. Now there's a little section here that talks about how you can include them, and that further publications might include updated rules or new profiles for units in this list. So effectively what this seems to be saying is that we might restat these guys at some point, and in that case use the new stats instead of these ones. And when you look at these, when you look at what they've done with the stats and rules on these guys, you can kind of see why that would be quite quickly, because these guys have got like no rules. They've got nothing that makes them special, larger-than-life characters that you really want when you're playing these guys that, you know, maybe your favourites from the Horus Heresy books and the lore. And, you know, that's kind of a little bit of a shame. You know, the rules, like, there are rules there, they're just super uninteresting and super boring. So I would certainly say, if you're a fan of the Knights Errant, this probably isn't the PDF that's going to make you want to put these guys on the table. You're probably better off waiting for new rules coming out, and they've sort of called that out, so that's okay. Although it is a little bit disappointing. You know, in some ways, they could have just left these guys out, especially since they've only included rules for 2 of them. They could have just left these guys out and not bothered. Would have probably been a better way to go about it. So let's go into some other units. So the Legion Nullificator Squad. So as far as I know, these guys have never had models, although I could be wrong. Just kind of like seems like a little bit of a weird include. They're super expensive, 245 points, weapon skill 4. They're meant to be like anti-demon guys, but they don't really have anything special about them. So they've got these Ether Shock Mauls, which are basically, you know, slightly worse power maces, but with Deflagrate, which is cool. But there's nothing anti-demon about that, right? It doesn't make any sense lore-wise. And they've got this ability where when psychic weapons try to wound them, they get a -1 to wound them, which is like super, super incredibly niche. They don't even get any bonuses to kill demons. So, you know, the unit itself is very expensive, super niche, and kind of pointless. Really, when you look at it, it's like, why include this? You know, if you're not going to give these guys some rules that actually make them unique, why write them? And, you know, certainly why give them a points cost like that? Because no one's really going to want to, you know, be excited to put these on the table. The Castroferrum Dreadnoughts, on the other hand, are actually pretty good, and it's a little bit of a shame to see these in an expanded sort of optional PDF, really, for me, because, you know, lots of people love these, and they are a classic Dreadnought build, and you want to be able to use them in your armies. These are really good, 125 points for what they've got. You know, they are slightly less strong and tough than a normal Dreadnought, 1 less wound. They've got 2 less initiative, but they're still going to go before the big weapons. And their deflector is basically the same as an atomantic deflector, but they take 3 wounds instead of D3 when they get hit by an instant death something. So these are good, actually. You know, from a competitive standpoint, they're actually like very, very good. So these are definitely something that you could include in your army. I really like them with 2 melee weapons, because I use like Contemptors in my army to shore up my melee abilities by giving them all a fist, and these guys are basically just as good, really, if you give them 2 fists, and they're cheaper. They're a bit less tough, but they're still very tough for what you pay for them. I don't really like the way the guns look on these Dreadnoughts either, so that plays into my decision a little bit, but they're really good, and you could certainly include these in your army and be happy. But again, they're in an expanded rules PDF, so, you know, you maybe not going to be able to, depending on your opponent or the event you're going to. So it would be nice to see these in a book properly. Then we've got, here's an example of something that's like maybe not so great, the Spatha Attack Bike Squadron. So 55 points, toughness 4, 1 wound. Like, what is that exactly? Like, why do they really dislike bikes so much in this edition? It's one of the things they seem to have just got hugely wrong, is bikes have got them expensive costs that we're used to in Warhammer. You know, they're normally a lot more expensive than a Marine, because they're normally tougher or more wounds or both. These are 55 points for toughness 4, 1 wound. They're like unplayably bad, and that's not a competitive comment. That's like, if you put these in your army and use them, you will be super disappointed all the time, because they're just not going to do, you know, what you want them to do if you really like the models. 25 points for a multi-melter makes these 80 points. You can get almost, for 10 more points, you can get a Javelin that's toughness 6 with 4 wounds, that's got deep strike, outflank, comes with 2 las cannons and a heavy bolter. This is just nuts. You know, get the stats right, or at least, if you're going to give them this crazy stat line, make them a points cost that actually reflects that. You know, nobody is going to want to put this in their army. Okay, so let's look at the Terminator Indomitus Squad. I mean, these are okay. There's not really anything wrong with these, but they're troops. Why are these troops? That's kind of a little bit weird. Seems like it's either an oversight, or they've made these troops for some reason. You don't really need access, or people shouldn't have access to just making Terminators troops, really. You know, they are a support squad, but it seems like quite a big change to the way that Terminators are presented throughout all the rest of the rules. So, you know, they're always elites, pretty much. You can make them troops, by taking a Rite of War, by taking Pride of the Legion, and some other Rite of Wars, but generally we're like restricting access to these like super tough, super efficient 2+ save units for the most part. But here we're making them troops, which is like probably not a good change for the game, you know, giving people the ability to sort of spam these very tough things at very little cost to their slots. So this is a little bit weird, and these are meant to be a little bit less common in the Heresy as well, whereas, you know, you're sort of making out that these are more common than the other marks of Terminator armor as well, so it doesn't really follow very much. Then we go on to the planes. So we got the Avenger Strike Fighter, we got the Thunderbolt, and also the Primaris Lightning. Now these are all like okay, you know, they come with like a decent amount of guns, and they come with, you know, reasonable armor, at least on the front for a flyer. You know, they're coming with 12. They've got that deep strike. Like, they're all okay. There's nothing necessarily wrong with them at the points they're at. But then you look at the Xiphon, which is already in the books, which has got better guns than all of these, and is 60, 70 points cheaper, depending on what you put on it. You look at the cost of the upgrades on this Lightning, for example. So this is probably the case that maybe the Xiphon's actually a bit too cheap, for sure, for what it does. But these are just all too expensive, and there's never a reason, there's absolutely no reason, bar the models, to put one of these in your army over a Xiphon. And you would feel pretty bad putting one of these in your army at, like, you know, 60% more points than a Xiphon, really. That, like, doesn't endear you to want to use these units, and that is a shame. Again, you put these on the tabletop, you want to have fun with them, you want to feel like they're effective. That goes for any unit in any army, no matter how you choose to play the game, and they just don't all need to be that expensive, which is, you know, just a bit of a shame. Land Raider Phobos, it's just as far as I can see, it's a literal copy-paste of the Proteus Carrier, which is fine. Only difference being you can't take it as a dedicated transport because it's not in any of the unit entries, but, you know, nothing wrong with that, I don't think. I think the rules for that being the same are all good. Land Raider Achilles is, you know, a bit of a fan favourite. I think it looks cool as well. Basically, you know, 2 Gravis Melter Cannons and a quad launcher. 320 points, it's quite expensive. It gets some extra special rules. It gets the anti-melter rule, Ferromantic Invulnerability. It gets to reroll its dangerous terrain tests, and just dangerous terrain tests. And it gets that quad launcher, obviously, as well. Cool unit. I don't think there's anything wrong with this. Maybe just a little bit on the pricey side, probably, for what it gets. But, you know, I don't think there's necessarily anything wrong with it being a little bit too expensive. Now we get onto a slightly contentious one for a lot of people. Basilisks and Medusas. So last edition, now, despite the fact that, you know, people who I see play Heresy repeatedly say that they play it for the narrative and, you know, not to win, there was a bizarrely large number of Medusas I saw in pictures from events. You know, even when people weren't playing Iron Warriors or something like that, lots of people were running lots of these. It was clearly a very competitive unit. People clearly latched onto that. Whether anyone wants to admit that or not, they did. And that's because these had big blasts and they were AP2 previously, which is really unhealthy for the game because it makes Space Marines just not worth playing. And Heresy is in a spot now where Space Marines are very worth playing, which is really, really good. But these Medusas have obviously been changed based on that, I would think. So it looks like they've taken a heavy nerf from the previous edition, which is correct because, you know, Strength 9 AP4, large blast that also pins and has Rend and 6 is a pretty great gun. The Medusa actually has also got front armor of 13 as well, and so does the Basilisk. So they're actually, you know, pretty decent guns. They're just a bit expensive, you know, when you consider that you can get a Whirlwind, which can also fire from outer line of sight and comes with Rend and 4 and still Strength 8 for 120 points, a Whirlwind Scorpius. These are just costed out. You know, if you are someone that owns a bunch of Medusas, again, you want to be able to put your stuff on the table and you want to feel like the stuff is cool and has an impact. And if you own a bunch of Medusas from last edition, again, a bit power gamey to have been running lots of them, but, you know, at least make them reasonably playable. Like, if these were 150 points or probably even 140 points, they'd still be very questionable versus the Whirlwind Scorpius, which is, I think, the right level of points and is pretty good. So they don't need to be 200 to the point where people are just going to be sad to use their units they've built and painted. Likewise, this Whirlwind as well, so, it loses a bunch of armor versus the Scorpius, and it's pretty much just worse. So it's AP missile, which is really not AP at all. It's really an anti-marine missile. Is breach and 4+, blast 3. It's basically just a worse version of the Scorpius launcher. So, it loses a strength, which means it does an instant death things, and it breaches instead of rends, and it has a smaller blast. So, in return for that shot being worse, you get the bonus of bringing an AA missile, which is, okay, I guess. It is a decent AA missile, but it also does only fire one shot, which does mean you're pretty much not going to take any flyers out with it. You're probably going to glance them at best. And then you get a really bad HE missile that you're probably never going to fire. So again, this is fine. There's nothing wrong with including this, I don't think, but it's just, it's just too bad compared to a Scorpius, really, and no one's ever really going to want to use that or be super happy using that. And in a lot of ways, it actually makes it worse. Like, previously, you could run a 40k looking Whirlwind and just use the Scorpius rules, which means you get to use a model that you maybe prefer, and you still get to use the same rules, where now these are out, you sort of need to use these rules for it because it's got its own rules now. And if you prefer that model of Whirlwind, you're just forced into taking something that's worse. The Caestus Assault Ram, so I didn't play, a lot of last edition, and I know a lot of people are upset about this because it's just been nerfed, but if we just take it on its own merits, 13 armor vehicle with assault vehicle and deep strike, okay, that's cool. 350 points though, with a transport capacity of 12. Who in the world is going to pay 350 points to deep strike 6 Terminators or 1 unit, especially when you've got drop pods that can do effectively the same thing, right, for less points? This is a vehicle that's quite well loved, and it'd be really nice to see this get good, well-balanced rules. I mean, if it's going to be 350 points, let it take more transports. Some of the the Storm Eagle, for example, can basically do this that this does, has got more guns on it, and is cheaper. There's just no reason to use this, whatsoever. It's just a shame to see something that people really like and would like to put in their armies just get such poor rules to the point where they're just going to want to leave it on their shelf, regardless of what type of player you are. So overall, I'm not going to go through every unit, but overall, I just think it's just really disappointing to see all these units get rules that just aren't good enough. They don't make you want to put them on the table. Now let's look at some of the Legion-specific units. Now the problem with this section for me is they're so wildly different depending on what Legion you're looking at. So we'll start with this one. Dark Angels in general get some really great stuff. They get a bunch of new Terminator companion options, all of which they can take Tyrannic Greatswords, loads of different ways to run those units with that melee weapon, which is probably the best melee weapon in the game. Loads of options for it. They also get this Exindio Battle Automata, weapon skill 6 on a toughness 7, 6 wound, 5 attack unit with a 2+ save. It's also got It Will Not Die 4+, which is incredible on something this tough. And that's just its base attacks as well, just base attacks 5. It also gets these 2 Manipulators, which are another 2 AP2 attacks that it's going to get at full initiative. So it's effectively 7 attacks base with AP2 and high strength. It's got the 5+ invulnerable save as well. It's just, incredible. I mean, it's basically a Primarch to all intents and purposes. Weapon skill 6, maybe not as high as a Primarch, but strength toughness 7, 7 attacks, 6 wounds. It will not die. It's pretty crazy. And then if we go down to this Vengeful Rage rule, it does give it some disadvantages. It's got to go towards the nearest. It's got to go towards the nearest unit if it fails a leadership test when it takes some wounds. But lo and behold, it's leadership 9, so it's probably not going to happen. So it's probably being reduced in cost to account for this. But most of the time, that's not going to Not going to happen. It's just, you know, a bit crazy. It's also got the Shackled Artificer unit type. So it's got lots of the benefits of being automata, notably Rage 2 and Hatred. So weapon skill 6, re-rolls over hit rolls in the first round of combat, and it's getting 2 attacks when it charges, so now it's 9 attacks on the charge. This thing is just absolutely bonkers. Like, this is like probably too good and needs to be fixed, but if you're gonna give some, out units like this randomly for people to use, then at least, give everyone something similar-ish. Because if we look on the flip side, if we look at what Iron Hands got, and, bear in mind, Iron Hands and Salamanders were pretty hard done by in the rulebook release. Like, they basically got a couple of pages, whereas, your Dark Angels, Imperial Fist got a whole lot of rules. So, they brought a couple of the characters back. Ortec Moore, he's basically just an Iron Father that you could build using your normal rules, more or less. You take a Praetor, you give him the Iron Father upgrade, you've basically got Ortec Moore. Yeah, he gets a slightly different manipulator array. He gets a really bad Warlord trait, +1 to the amount of wounds caused when calculating his 1 close combat, which is, a fine Warlord trait. It's a default Warlord trait in the book. There's lots of Legion-specific units that get this. But Ortec Moore's one does a single unsavable wound to his own unit when he uses it. What's that all about? You'd never take this. You'd just never, ever want to do that when you could just take a normal Iron Father who's basically got all the same rules he has but doesn't hurt your own unit. Just crazy bad writing. Crazy bad writing. Makes really no sense. And then as we go down a little bit further, we get to the Ultramarines, who clearly had someone who liked them writing these rules. Honored Telemachus, he's a Dreadnought. He's got weapon skill 6, again, which is great. Wound 7, so he's +1 wound, which is also really good. And he's also got a Hatred, is the Hatred special rule as well. And for those, buffs, he pays 240 points. So, that's worth it for the weapon skill alone, because weapon skill 6 is just huge in this game. But, he gets some pretty solid buffs for, 40, 45-ish points. Hatred and weapon skill 6, 45-ish points above a normal Contemptor Dreadnought. He's a bit dull as well. That's all he gets, just a few rules. So, he doesn't pass the is this unit really cool test, but he certainly passes the got some great stats for his points test. We'll talk more about that in a minute, so just remember his stats. Full Mentaurus Terminator squad as well. So this is Guilliman copying Iron Warriors, Siege Tyrants, except apparently he's just done it incredibly better than they did. So they got firing protocols too, so they can fire their Hellfire plasma missiles and their combi bolter in the same turn. They're 290 points. They're ballistic skill 5, so that's quite a big deal when you've got a weapon that looks like this as well. So strength 8, instant deaths most Space Marines. AP 2, brutal 2 on a gun. That is huge. And also with the Peritarch Targeter, they can fire from outer line of sight. So ballistic skill 5, fire from outer line of sight, strength 8, AP 2, brutal 2. These are incredibly good. They can just snipe other people's Terminators. With brutal 2, you've got a good chance of going through even invulnerable saves. They're going to instant death them anyway. You can shoot at Dreadnoughts with these and just take multiple wounds off them, all from being completely out of line of sight. And if someone does get a line of sight to them, well, they're Terminators and they've all got power weapons anyway. These are too good compared to other things that are in the game. Bear in mind all that was ballistic skill 5 as well. These are just too good for their points. There's just no need for a unit like this really to exist, and it's unfair on other legions as well that don't get something equivalent power level. Similarly, the Lokitara Storm Squad. So this is just anything you can do, I can do better to other legions. So there's lots of decent veteran style weapon skill 5 units out there with jump packs, which is cool. But these guys get a incredibly good unique power sword weapon. So it's AP 3, but it's Rendon 5, and it's got Duelist Edge as well. Now that it might not seem like a lot, but that's actually quite a lot. Rendon 5 is quite a big deal. And having Duelist Edge, because they are also chosen warriors, meaning they can potentially squish stuff before they go, is good. And again, just having access to like a unit like this devalues other legions that have access to units like this, because that's like their thing. Because these guys also get +1 to hit with Blade of Wisdom if someone shot them. Now that's a cool Ultramarine style, combined arms rule, but they're just a little bit too much, and they're stepping into the realms of what other legions sort of do, which is a little bit of a shame. And then, again, we flip back to Salamanders. So remember what Honoured Telemachus got for 240 points. Cassian Dracos Reborn is a Castroferum Dreadnought, so he's only Strength 6, Toughness 6. He's only Wounds 5. He's got, 2 Grabbers Power Fists. He's got Heavy Flamers on them. And he's got, a couple of rules. Now, we don't know what this Cyber Theurgic Arcana is going to do. And, maybe it's Psychic Power level of good. So maybe that's going to be worth 40 or 50 points. But he's downgraded. Compared to Honoured Telemachus, he's a Castroferum Dreadnought, not a Contemptor. He doesn't have Hatred. He doesn't have Weapon Skill 6. He's 310 points. 310 points. It's just a crazy amount of points. Why is he so expensive? Salamanders just, whoever's written these rules for Salamanders is just not really giving them any love. Similar Lord Chaplain Nomus Raitan. Really big character, super important in the lore, all that kind of stuff. He's a Praetor, basically, Master of the Legion. He's got all the Praetor rules. Excuse me. 215 points, Praetor level points cost, Weapon Skill 4. Weapon Skill 4. Only 3 wounds as well, because he's, got to come in power armor. Yeah, he's got a Mantle of the Elder Drake. That's cool. He's got Stubborn Hatred. That's also cool. But look at these stats. Weapon Skill 4. One of two things. Either he's just crazily bad and overpriced, or he is really badly written and someone's just made mistakes in the PDF. One or the other. I mean, even his weapon. Look at his power weapon. It's basically just a power axe. It's two-handed. It's got +1 extra strength, but it's two-handed. Compared to the weapons elsewhere throughout the PDF that lots of the other characters are getting, they're basically the same as this, except they're not unwieldy and not two-handed, and some of them have even got more rules. Like, why do they dislike Salamanders? It doesn't really make an awful lot of sense. And again, especially much like Iron Hands, since they were the one of the units in the book that got very little and could have really done with being gifted some extra stuff, it's just a bit of a shame to for them to get that treatment. Rylanor, everyone has been waiting to see Rylanor's stats, and when we got them, we got this. So 250 points. He is a Dreadnought with an extra attack. With an extra wound. He loses an attack because he's only got one close combat weapon, whereas Honoured Telemachus, don't forget, kept his 4 attacks, even though he's also got a Carries Assault Cannon. And Rylanor got Crusader. So for 10 points more than Honoured Telemachus, he's 1 weapon skill less, 1 attack less, and he switches Hatred for Crusader. What is that all about? Like, this guy's such a beloved character, and he's really, really good as well. Like, where was someone spending time filling this page with some boxes with some special rules in, giving him some decent stats? He's just a Dreadnought with Crusader and a wound. Like, how dull can you get? It's really, really boring. Boring and overcosted for what he got. Real shame for people who were looking forward to that character coming out. The Tormentor. A converted super heavy vehicle augmented with additional armor plates to accommodate Perturabo's scale and that of his Iron Circle bodyguard. So, okay, yeah, transport capacity 24, cool. 900 points. It's got a volcano cannon. It's got void shields. Armor 13. There's a few things there. You basically seem to be paying a ton of points to be able to transport Perturabo. Armor 13 and 12 hit points. Armor 13 isn't enough for your void shield to be any good for a start. It's just going to get taken down. But Armor 13 and 12 hit points is just so easy to destroy. in the current game with, especially with las cannons or Rendon auto cannons. It's got a turret-mounted volcano cannon and BS5, so there's some cool, modelling opportunities there. But 900 points, like how can you pay that many points for something that can get blown up so easily, even if it does give you quite a unique ability? Like, if this was 650 points, you'd look at it and go, oh, okay, that's pretty decent. And if it was 700 points, you'd probably be, okay, yeah, that's fine, I might take that for fun. 900 points, it's a full third of someone's army, and it's not gonna, even if you converted this when All Out made it, it'd be awesome as a shelf ornament. Like, putting it on the table would just make you feel bad that Perturabo's super souped up command tank ride just gets taken off the table turn one by anyone with some guns. Not the way to make the game fun, really. Iron Havocs on the other end of the spectrum. So these guys are Ballistic Skill 5 is the first thing to point out at them. They also get Precision Shots 6 as well. They get a slightly reduced weapon options, but that shouldn't be a reason to make them so cheap, because compared to a unit of 5 heavy support squad, for if you give them autocannons, which you will, because autocannons are really good in Iron Warriors, or missile launchers, you're basically paying 2 points per model in this squad for an extra ballistic skill and precision shot 6. Now, you would pay that absolutely every time, so this unit effectively makes heavy support squads obsolete for Iron Warriors. That doesn't, again, if it was 0-1 unit of these or something like that, maybe, but it's still a very, very powerful unit. It's just given one Legion a massively powerful thing that they just don't really need, I don't think. So, I think that's probably enough units. I think you get the point. The point I'm trying to make. The level of writing in this PDF reminds me a lot of old school Forge World rules, and for anyone who doesn't know what I mean by that, Forge World has always released rules for its units, and they've always felt and generally been just wild. Often units that are like completely unplayable, or units that are just incredibly overpowered because of the way they're written or the points they're given or something like that. And also just, again, all over the place. Some stuff gets really good rules, some armies get really good stuff, some armies get really bad stuff. This is just like that, and it really smacks of something someone's thrown together. Now, given the great state Heresy is in, and what I think is, good balance and lots of good options, particularly if you're not playing at the top end of the competitive scale for Heresy today, this actually, makes the game worse, this PDF. And for lots of people who are waiting for rules for their favourite characters, people are waiting in hope, looking forward to their favourite characters come out. And when the favourite characters do come out and they've got bad rules, it's actually worse than just waiting for longer until they come out in a book and you can actually see them with good rules. So it's just it's just a huge miss. Now, if this PDF is just a stopgap and it's just intended like a sort of compendium that they've done for 40k in AOS before, if it's just a stopgap to let people get some of these things on the table if they want to, no matter how bad the rules are, then that's fine. We can just pretend this doesn't exist if we want to pretend it doesn't exist and get on with things. But these PDFs do create problems like that Terminator unit with the plasma missiles for Ultramarines, or that Dark Angels battle automata. You force people into a bad position when their opponent says, I want to bring these, and nobody wants to be the guy who says, oh, don't really want you to bring them. But those kind of units ruin games. They can really make games unfun, especially if your army didn't get anything in this PDF. So you do put people in a kind of difficult social position by putting rules like this out, and it's not really cool. My thoughts on this would be that the best thing for it would be to pretend it doesn't exist and really use what they've said at the start of this PDF about core and expanded rules, take it in the spirit in which it's maybe meant, and say, I've read this PDF, I don't think it's very good, I'm going to treat it as a optional rules add-on and not use it. I think that would be best for everyone else. And if you are playing one of the Legions that did get the great stuff in this, the Iron Havocs, all of the Ultramarine stuff, the Dark Angels battle automata, try to try to control yourself a little bit, and don't say, oh, I think this PDF's great just because you were one of the few legions that got some kind of silly stuff. Like curb it a bit and think about what your opponent might be feeling about the things they've got, and don't put it on your opponent to decide whether they want to be the guy who's telling you they don't want you to bring these silly units. Put it on yourself. Think about how you'd feel if the positions were reversed. I think it would be better if we just pretend this doesn't exist, honestly. So, despite how great Heresy has been, and I do love the Heresy rule set and everything that's been done with the units so far, this is a swing and a miss by Games Workshop, absolutely. Let's all wait for these units to get some quality, well-tested rules, maybe written by the people who wrote the rest of the rules, rather than, maybe this has maybe not been that. Let's keep Heresy great as it is so far, and let's not, let ourselves get let down by a pretty poor product. No more rush jobs, please. Keep the quality up, and we'll all be happy. So that's the end of the episode. No, that was quite long. I know it's not similar to the kind of videos I do normally. This is more of an opinion piece. I'm sure you guys have got tons of opinions on it. Please do leave me a comment. Anything you'd like to discuss about this. Give me your thoughts, your feelings, agree, disagree. And also don't forget to drop that like and subscribe as well if you enjoy the content. I'm off, guys. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.